of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you're tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Mormon Newscast. Today's date is July 29th, 2024. I'm Radio Free Mormon, and I'm joined by Bill Reel on this newscast. Good evening, Mr. Reel. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing? By the way, I saw you waving. But I was already too late. So anything you want to say now, or should we just move forward, my friend?
No, so I had texted you in the did you see what I said?
No, my phone is turned off.
It says, do you want me to take the lead? Because
it's all yours.
With all the arranging and everything we've been doing for tonight's show, we didn't get around to saying who's going to take the lead, because Rebecca Biblioteca will not be joining us tonight. She has a family member in the hospital, so she is otherwise engaged. So we certainly send prayers and good wishes her way. But we'll still talk about a little temple stuff at the end and go over some documents that she has sent us. So she will be here in spirit. Anyway, are you ready to go?
I am. In fact, I think we have some breaking news to begin with, right, Mr. Radio Free Mormon?
Yeah, there's some breaking news on the John Dehlin criminal case. I did an episode on this, which released on Friday, I believe it was, about the criminal charge of violating a non-existent stalking order that Jen Camp had lodged against John Dehlin. The police did their thorough investigation, and their very thorough investigation failed to show that order had actually been dismissed over a year ago in March of 2023. The allegation was that he had violated it in November of 2023. And I had predicted on that podcast, which once again aired last Friday, that John's attorney would be calling the prosecutor and talking with them and showing them the order dismissing the temporary restraining order. And then it would be dismissed. This criminal charge would be dismissed. Well, this is the breaking news. Here's the order of dismissal. That happened pretty quick. This is Monday now, as I said, July 29th, 2024. Less than 3 days later, and here is the order of dismissal of the criminal charge. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, it was filed today, July 29th, 2024, and I believe it was at 3:30 p.m. So 3:30 this afternoon, Utah time. So that is pretty up-to-date and breaking news. This is just it says, it is hereby ordered that the information in the above entitled matter be dismissed. The judge's signature is also up there in the upper right-hand corner. They do a lot of things electronically there in Utah. And this is simply the second page of the order, the certificate of delivery. So that is the breaking news, and wanted to get that out of the way up front. Any thoughts from you, Mr. Reel?
Other than I think all of us could have saw that coming with our eyes closed. So I don't think there was any big surprises.
Yes, the only people who couldn't see it coming were the two officers who were involved in investigating this, and Rory, the prosecutor, who I've been advised now is not a male. It is a female in the prosecutor's office who reviewed the charge and said it was okay to file it. So it is now unfiled. It is now dismissed, and that is the end of that particular story. There may be a few more permutations going on at this point. It may or may not be that John Dehlin is, even as we speak, at the police department, lodging criminal charges of his own against Jen Camp for filing a false report against him. Okay, so that's charges against John Dehlin dismissed. The other three stories are death penalty reversed in Utah due to church talk. Now, that's very ambiguous. We'll get into more detail about what that means and why a death penalty was reversed. It does have to do with the LDS Church, very much so, because it was because of reference and talk about the church during the sentencing, the penalty phase, that got this death penalty overturned just this past Thursday. I believe that opinion came out on July 25th. Days of 47 parade. You've got a story about that. And Satan's changing role. You'll be covering that as well. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about the McKinney or Fairview, Texas Temple City Council meeting scheduled for next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, on August 6th. Okay, so if we're ready to go, first off, I've read the entire 42-page opinion from the Utah Supreme Court on this case, and I've broken it down. I wanted to start out with this news report. I looked at several news reports. I had one that was ready to go. I thought, nah, I don't really like that one that much. We're going to go with this one. This has a picture of the defendant, Douglas Lovell, back. This is probably back from 1994, perhaps, when this was originally pleaded out. It's been around a long time. The murder that he's been convicted of, and which conviction remains in effect, happened in 1985 when he murdered a woman named Joyce Yost. And the reason he murdered her is because he had previously raped her twice. And then she was going to go to the cops. She did go to the cops. She was going to be a witness against him. Apparently, he was not in jail pending trial, and he decided to get somebody to go and murder her. The first person did not go and murder her, so he got a second person to go and murder her. The second person did not go and murder her, so he decided to go and murder her himself, which he did by kidnapping her, taking her up into a canyon, and strangling her to death in 1985. So that's the background on this. This story is just about 2 minutes long. The news story, 2.5 minutes long. It's going to take a little bit more time to break it down, but we've got a little bit of time tonight, and we'll do that here on the Mormon Newscast. But we'll start off with this story.
The Utah Supreme Court is giving death row inmate Doug Lovell a new sentencing hearing. He's convicted of murdering Joyce Yost in 1985. Our Jonathan May is on the story for us today. He joins us live in the newsroom. And Jonathan, so many people are wondering here, why did the court make this decision?
Well, Brian, after reading the court's opinion, they agreed Lovell did not receive the representation the United States Constitution guarantees him, saying his two attorneys failed to object to testimony regarding Lovell's excommunication from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Now they have to go back to sentencing. So it's painful for the victims to deal with that. It's painful for the defendant to have this uncertainty. It's painful for everyone in the process.
April 2015, a jury sentenced Doug Lovell to death row for the murder of Joyce Yost. We were there, talking with the family who said Lovell had no remorse.
When we cried, he didn't cry. When he had a chance to show emotion, he didn't.
It was the second time Lovell was sentenced to die. The first was back in 1993. 8 years prior to that, Lovell kidnapped Joyce Yost and raped her. Yost reported these crimes to the police. Lovell then attempted to hire two individuals to kill Yost to prevent her from testifying against him. Those attempts failed, and Lovell kidnapped Yost, killing her in a canyon outside of Ogden. Today, the court ruled to vacate his sentence and asked a lower court to give him a new one. The court wrote in part, quote, Lovell's two attorneys provided ineffective assistance when they failed to object to, among other things, testimony regarding Lovell's excommunication from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Here's why the state Supreme Court may have ruled the way they did today.
The court said, no, you cannot bring that information in. That's confusing to the jury. You're dealing with criminal case, you're dealing with the criminal standards that are set by the state of Utah, not concerning yourself with the standards from the LDS Church and whether he's excommunicated.
Sim says the court wants to make sure he has all his rights.
They did two things. They said, one, he's absolutely guilty. We think that he's guilty. We're not overturning the conviction, but should he be sentenced the way that he was? Should it, and maybe you'll end up at the same result, but it has to be fair along the way.
Again, the court is not overturning Lovell's murder conviction, just arguing that he should have a fair sentencing hearing. Live in the newsroom, Jonathan May, ABC4 News. Brian.
And we will be following that, Jonathan. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, we took our pictures off the screen so that hopefully the video could run a little smoother. It was getting kind of choppy with both of us there, but I think it went pretty well. So there are a couple of errors in that report. Once again, this is a complicated situation. I would have a very difficult time covering it adequately in the time that they had for the news report. But here is, I was going to add this. Yeah, here is the heading for the opinion. And you can see it's the state of Utah versus Douglas Lovell. And it was heard February 9th, 2024. That means that's the date it was argued before the Utah Supreme Court. And the opinion itself was filed July 25th, 2024. So just break in here and let me know if you have any questions as we go along, Bill, or perhaps if anybody in the audience has any particular questions. Hopefully I'll cover those questions as we go. I'm just restricting this, however, to the issue about the reversal of the death penalty, because that's what involves the LDS Church. We already talked about the facts of the case. I'm going to go ahead and skip this because we already talked about that once. I did, and so did the news report. that was the facts of the case. Lovell received ineffective assistance of counsel during the penalty phase of his trial. This is taken directly from the opinion itself. You'll see it says paragraph 58. In opinions, they number paragraphs. There's page numbers. There's also paragraph numbers, which I'm not exactly sure why they do that, because I really don't see when you're citing this, anybody citing to paragraph numbers. They cite to page numbers, but it's a custom. Lovell, the defendant, argues on appeal that his death sentence must be overturned and that he must be given a new sentencing hearing because his counsel provided ineffective assistance during the penalty phase of his trial. While Lovell raises multiple claims of ineffectiveness, we focus on one, and the reason they're only focusing on the one is because they only have to focus on this one. They're going to reverse it based upon this one, so they don't need to discuss the rest. And that issue is whether trial counsel was ineffective for failing to adequately object to testimony about church doctrine and Lovell's status within the church. Let me see here. Go to the next page. Ineffective assistance of counsel. So here's a little background information. It goes into this in the opinion. It's helpful to know this as well, so people who don't know the law in this regard can understand what's going on and why it was that they reached this particular decision, which I have to agree with them on is probably the correct decision that the Utah Supreme Court made. In substance, even if I have some personal difficulty with how it was they got there, and we'll get to that at the end. Essential to a criminal defendant's Sixth Amendment right to counsel, which you find in the Sixth Amendment, right? The right to counsel, is the right to the effective assistance of counsel. And that is a case that's from Strickland versus Washington. It's a 1984 case. And this has yielded what's called the Strickland test. It's a two-part test for ineffective assistance of counsel. To assess whether a defendant has been denied the representation the United States Constitution promises, we apply the two-part test Strickland established. Strickland requires the defendant to show that, number one, counsel's performance was deficient, and number two, the deficient performance prejudiced the defendant. So you have to show both of those things in order to prevail on an appeal based upon ineffective assistance of counsel. Now, the first prong is counsel's performance was deficient. Would no attorney have used this tactic as part of any reasonably viable courtroom strategy? That is really the question that's being looked at when the courts review it, because it's easy to come back and Monday morning quarterback an attorney's performance and say, well, this was a dumb thing to do because obviously it led to a conviction, right? But you don't get to have 20/20 hindsight here. Here you have to look at it from the point of view of the attorney in real time as the attorney is making this decision to do whatever it is that's being objected to. There's going to be a strong presumption that an attorney is going to be behaving adequately and not deficiently. So if there's any reason that can be read into why it is the attorney is making this particular strategic decision that would be a legitimate trial tactic, then you cannot show that counsel's performance was deficient. So that's a pretty high burden, and it's intentionally high. So I think I've already just talked about everything that's in that slide. And the second prong, did counsel's performance prejudice the defendant? So if you establish, first off, that counsel's performance was deficient, that doesn't get you there. You also have to prove that the deficiency itself prejudiced the defendant. It must be shown that it prejudiced the defendant in order for a conviction or a death penalty, in this case, be overturned due to ineffective assistance of counsel, i.e., and this is an important i.e., a reasonable probability that but for the deficient performance by counsel, the result would have been different. So if the counsel had not performed deficiently, the result would have had to have been different, obviously more favorable to the defendant, otherwise they wouldn't be appealing it in the first place. In death penalty cases, this must be scrutinized even more closely than in other cases because of the severity of the penalty. So it's also helpful to know that in death penalty cases, there are two phases to the trial. The first is called the guilt phase. That's the actual criminal trial. It's what we all understand to be a trial when you call witnesses and a jury goes and deliberates and they come back and find the individual guilty. Now, if they don't find him guilty, then you never get to the penalty phase, right? So the first part is the guilt phase, the criminal trial. Once they find the defendant guilty of murder, Then the penalty phase ensues. It's a separate phase. And the jury has to determine, not the judge, the jury has to determine whether death is the appropriate penalty. If the jury cannot decide or decides against it, it defaults to life imprisonment. So the jury could say, 12 of them could say, no, we don't think that death penalty is appropriate. Or 6 of them could say, we don't think the death penalty is appropriate. Or one person could say, I'm not convinced that the death penalty is appropriate. It has to be unanimous. If even one juror says, no, I'm not convinced, then it defaults to life imprisonment. Is that part clear, Bill?
Yeah, that seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, these are the rules of the game.
Yep.
Issues at the penalty phase for the state and for the defense. First off, for the state, i.e. the prosecutor, typically, the prosecutor will focus on how awful the crime was. It is usually pretty awful in the first place for prosecutors to even seek the death penalty. Also, prosecutors will focus on the impact to the victim's family and the lack of remorse of the defendant. In Utah, there must be found at least one aggravating factor by the jury. Here, it's easy, because killing a witness to prevent them from testifying at trial is a specifically stated aggravating factor that can be used to support the death penalty. So that wasn't really an issue as to whether it could be imposed. It was whether the jury was going to impose it after hearing all the evidence produced by both parties at the penalty phase. Conversely, now for the defense, the defense will typically focus on what the defendant has done of a positive nature in his life. Here it's a he, it could be a her life. And here, where Douglas Lovell has been in prison for almost 40 years now, what he has done positively while incarcerated. And interestingly, there was actually a lot of stuff that was presented about Douglas Lovell by the defense. And these are called mitigating factors as opposed to aggravating factors, right? So a mitigating factor mitigates against death penalty. There were actually quite a number of mitigating factors presented by the defense. And those were, Lovell has been a model prisoner. He's been helpful to the guards as well as to prisoners. Lovell has participated in some way in furtherance of 3 different charities while he's been incarcerated. And 3, Lovell has shown a great deal of remorse. At least evidence was shown of that. Up to and including not wanting to talk about the atonement of Jesus Christ because he cannot forgive himself for what he did. Now, let's get to what caused the problems, okay? The defense calls Lovell's bishop as a witness. The defense called the bishop to testify regarding jail visits that the bishop had made to Lovell, because Lovell isn't coming by the bishop's office anytime in the last 40 years. But he's talking about times that the bishop has gone to visit Lovell. And the defense, interestingly and very strategically, they avoided referring to the bishop by his church title. I think they just called him some kind of a minister. I don't think they could even call him a minister. It's just sort of a clergyman, right? They didn't make a connection with Mormonism. I mean, it's a Mormon jury, right? The closest, so they just called the bishop Dr. Newton. Apparently he's a doctor of some sort. The defense avoided talking about anything related specifically to religion. The closest testimony came to religion was when the defense attorney asked Dr. Newton what he and Lovell talked about when the bishop was visiting him in prison. And the response was that sometimes Lovell had questions about the Bible and Book of Mormon. That's it. It wasn't a question. It's a response. That's as close as it gets to introducing anything about the subject of religion. So really, all that the defense is calling the bishop for is to testify, I think rather briefly, about his visits, his interactions with Lovell, and his remorse over the murder that he committed. Now, the prosecutor takes the floor and begins to cross-examine Dr. Newton, and the prosecutor goes too far. The prosecutor asks Dr. Newton about whether Lovell had been excommunicated. The answer was he had, without a trial, because he wasn't available to come to a trial. Sometimes they excommunicate people, even if they're not there, as you have heard, I'm sure. And whether Dr. Newton had been and whether Lovell had been readmitted to the church by the first presidency. Okay. The prosecutor further linked readmission to the church with godly sorrow. This is in a series of questions to Dr. Newton. The prosecutor further linked readmission to the church with godly sorrow and contrition and remorse. To the point, the message was pretty clear to the jury that the church had not allowed Lovell to be readmitted to the church because he had not shown sorrow and contrition. See, this is the way they're undermining all of the testimony by the defense that actually he was sorrowful and contrite. So the argument that they're trying to make from the questions they're asking this witness is that really Lovell, the defendant, was not sorrow, he was not contrite, because if he had been, he would have been readmitted back into the LDS church by the first presidency. It looks like you want to say something.
I want to say, how many people are you aware of, RFM, who got readmitted to the church while alive, while sitting behind bars?
I know. I mean, I think that's kind of one
Zero?
of the things, isn't it?
Yeah,
You
I would
actually
think
get
zero.
readmitted to the church while you're still serving your sentence. Don't you have to have paid your debt to society before you're even potentially eligible?
Yeah,
But I
and
don't
in
think
order
that
to
came up.
yeah, and in order to be readmitted, do you have to be rebaptized? Because you've been excommunicated.
Yes, you would.
Yeah, so you can't do that from inside prison either. So in other words, they used a thing which he could in no way, shape, or form carry out the thing that they used against him in order to say that he was not repentant.
That's absolutely true.
Yep.
And the only access I have to the transcripts from the trial or from the penalty phase testimony are those things that are quoted within the opinion itself. That was never touched on in any of the opinion or in any of the quoted materials from the transcript.
Yeah.
And that is the problem the Supreme Court identified and why the death sentence was reversed and remanded back for a new sentencing, a guilt phase. So once again, this is paragraph 95 from the opinion. The state's cross-examination suggested that Lovell's excommunication from the church and subsequent failure to be readmitted by its first presidency was evidence that he lacked genuine remorse. I highlighted that. It insinuated that the jury could consider whether the church had found Lovell sufficiently remorseful as a proxy for deciding themselves whether he was truly a changed person. This testimony invited the jury to believe that the responsibility for determining the appropriateness of the defendant's death rests elsewhere, because the church had already determined that Lovell was not remorseful by not readmitting him to membership. Then paragraph 124, you can see I'm definitely skipping around in this opinion. Without the improper religious testimony, there is a reasonable probability that at least one member of the jury would not have been convinced that the state had met its burden. And they're focusing on the one juror because all it takes is one, right? That's why I took the time to explain that earlier. And because of that, this is the part where they've already found that it was improper. They're going to lay all this at the defense attorney's feet. But they've already found that it was improper. And now they're finding that indeed he was prejudiced by this testimony. So it was remanded for resentencing. Some news agencies are questioning whether the death penalty is still on the table on resentencing because the opinion doesn't specifically make mention of it. I think it's pretty clear, though, that there is nothing in the opinion that would prevent the prosecutor from seeking the death penalty at a subsequent sentencing hearing. And in fact, that's what I expect that they will do. Conclusion, and that's their conclusion, by the way. That's their word conclusion at the end of the 42-page opinion. Lovell has not shown that his conviction for the murder of Joyce Yost should be overturned. We affirm his conviction. He had a really dumb argument on that on appeal, and that was squashed in the first part of the opinion. No, your conviction remains. But as to the death penalty on that conviction, Lovell's trial counsel rendered ineffective assistance when they failed to effectively object. You see, the fellow on the newscast said they didn't object. That's not actually correct. They did object, not once, but twice. They objected twice to this line of questioning. And the trial judge overruled both their objections. Their objections, however, were not specific enough. And so what this opinion does is it lays the fault at the feet of the defense attorneys for not objecting specifically enough or doing enough to keep this from happening. And apparently, the prosecutor gets off the hook because that was just prosecutorial misconduct. And it should have been reversed for that reason, I believe. I will tell you that as a defense attorney, doesn't make any difference. Either way, you're happy, you win. If you got to take the bullet for your client, that's one of the things you're paid to do. And, it got reversed. So from the defense attorney's point of view, that's a win. Lovell's trial counsel rendered ineffective assistance when they failed to effectively object or otherwise sufficiently respond. See how squishy this is? To testimony regarding Lovell's excommunication from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and regarding the need for him to repent and demonstrate remorse to the church's first presidency before it could readmit him to membership. And you're right, Bill. No, this was not even a possibility for that to have ever happened, which only makes it worse. This evidence prejudiced Lovell's ability to have a jury fairly weigh the aggravating and mitigating factors as Utah's capital sentencing statute requires before it sentenced him to death. We vacate Lovell's sentence and remand for further proceedings. And here's where I had made a slide about the issue of ineffective assistance of counsel. Note that the defense did object to the line of questioning by the prosecutor of Dr. Newton twice, but these objections were characterized as anemic by the Supreme Court. This is, by the way, a unanimous opinion. There were two of the members of the Supreme Court who recused themselves from this particular case, and they had other judges substitute in their place. But of the judges who were there, it was unanimous. But these objections, while it is true that the specific objections may not have been as on point and specific as they should have been, and that is true, I don't see anywhere in this opinion taking the prosecutor to task for pursuing this line of questioning in the first place. Nor is there anything finding fault with the trial judge for letting such a perversion of justice occur in his courtroom. Now, it's certainly true that a judge is supposed to be an umpire. He's supposed to call the balls and the strikes, and he's not supposed to call them unless there's an objection made by one of the parties, right? Usually. But there were two objections made, and the judge could have taken those objections, realized what was going on, and put a stop to it, which would have taken care of this entire trip up to the Supreme Court, and this entire argument, and this entire thing getting overturned and remanded back to the court, the trial court, so it can be done again. Obviously, without any reference to the church or repentance or being readmitted back into the church. So that is that story. And I think that's it. Yeah, because then it goes to you. Any thoughts about that?
You have first, what the thing I brought up, which is, you're right, RFM. The rule in the church, at least when I was bishop, the way I understood it, is if we were working with somebody who had criminal charges or had a conviction, we needed to wait until the back end of that process when that person had paid their debt to society. And then if they met with me and showed sufficient remorse and sorrow, then I could apply to the first presidency on their behalf and see if we could get them readmitted to the church. But that's only one issue. The other issue would be maybe he doesn't want to rejoin Mormonism. Maybe he doesn't believe in Mormonism anymore. Mm-hmm. And he is deeply sorrowful and repentant, but he doesn't want to connect with that religion, and maybe not any religion. It really seems like a nonsensical argument to use a specific religious theology and whether one rejoins that particular church as any sort of kind of credible evidence that one has repented of whatever wrongdoing that they've done.
You're right. And I didn't see anything in the opinion addressing that part either, that it assumes that he wanted to rejoin the church.
Yeah. if I stop believing in Mormonism in the middle of committing some crime or suffering the penalty for it, my lack of wanting to rejoin Mormonism shouldn't be allowed to be used against me.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like I say, I think this was the right result. But once again, they're going to blame the defense attorneys. They're going to take it in the shorts as far as the Supreme Court goes, and the prosecutor gets off scot-free, even though it's the prosecutor who caused this whole thing in the first place.
In spite of all of this, what you're saying is technically they could, when they go back to the resentencing for this conviction, because the conviction holds up.
Right.
When they go back to the resentencing, they could literally just put the death penalty back into place again. And it would be almost as if all of this was for nothing other than to right the wrong of the rule, but not right the wrong of any sort of outgrowth penalty for the actual conviction, if that makes sense.
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, but let me go ahead and just say that, yeah, it goes back down to the trial court, and they have to have a clean penalty phase where they're not asking the jury or allowing the jury to substitute the decision of a different court, a church disciplinary process, to be their off-ramp to, oh, I don't have to make this decision. It's a tough decision. I mean, I don't think there's many decisions in life greater than sitting on a jury in a death penalty phase. Because what you're deciding is whether this person's life shall be taken.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I almost did a penalty with that. That's why I stopped for a second. Yeah. Suffer this person's life to be taken. That's it. Suffer his life to be taken. So it's very, very difficult, but it's got to be clean, and you can't be, invoking religion or invoking the fact that, well, he must not be contrite because he didn't get readmitted into the church.
Right. Suffer his life to be taken lest he, yeah, right. Okay.
The implication is almost that the first presidency does not believe he's contrite.
Right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to ask you. I think that, by the way, you explained it really well. His religious beliefs was used by the prosecutor in order to convince the jury that he wasn't repentant, when in reality, religious beliefs, whether one aligns with a church or wants to realign with the church, shouldn't really have anything to do with that.
I would phrase it as saying that the prosecutor attempted and may have used the religious beliefs of the jurors in order to make it easier for them to impose the death penalty.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
And he might still get the death penalty. I mean, even if you throw this idea out, I mean, he tried to hire two different people to murder the witness who he happened to rape twice as well.
Yeah. This guy should not be breathing. He should be dead.
Yeah.
And if somebody asked me, if it were state sanctioned and I were authorized to, I'd happily put a bullet in this guy's head and go home and eat a big dinner afterward.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
have no remorse about that. This guy needs to be dead. But when the state does it, there are certain rules in play, and the prosecutor stomped all over his rights in doing it, and so it got reversed, and now they've got to go over and do it again. At least they don't have to do the actual trial again. They're just going to do the guilt phase.
Yeah, we all have a right to a fair trial.
Yes.
So, okay. Sweet. I think that was explained great, and I think the audience walks away understanding what it was that was going on there. When the first time I looked at the story, I didn't have a clue how to make sense of that, and until I took a couple times to read it and sort of look at some other articles, and then I think you made it crystal clear.
Thank you very much. What's next?
All right, so let me go to this. So just there are two little stories here that I'll share. The first one is the Days of 47 parade. This is the Pioneer Day parade. I believe this happens somewhere up in northern Utah. It isn't around my neck of the woods, I don't believe, but up in northern Utah. And the cool thing about this was Elder David Bednar, who is an apostle in the quorum, a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
Is that David Bednar in the middle there?
No, that's not. And Susan's not up there either. But we'll get to them in just a moment. This was just to show the name of Days of 47. But Elder David Bednar, is a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Almost everybody, if not everyone, is watching. But I know once in a while we do have people who watch who are not members of this religion, and we want to make sure we inform them to that degree. But Elder Bednar was named the Grand Marshal of the parade. And what I thought was interesting, and by itself, it's a nothing, but it's Elder David Bednar's name is on both sides of the vehicle. His wife is completely ignored, even though she's in the vehicle. And by itself, maybe it's a nothing. He's the Grand Marshal. Why wouldn't it just be his name? But the trouble is we have some history here where David O. McKay is in big, giant italics font, and his wife, who's also in the vehicle with him, is in much smaller lettering, no italics, no angle to the word. And so as normal, Mormonism is a patriarchy, and it always celebrates the men, and the women are nowhere to be found other than sitting next to the man. But in terms of getting any sort of recognition, they are never picked to be the Grand Marshal. They're never, the name is never that big on the poster. And after this life, they won't be the ones who are receiving planets and populating those planets with life and plant life and animal life. It's all a man's job. The only thing women do is give birth to those spirit children in the shadows. So that's their only thing to do. But sort of an old memory of David O. McKay in a similar position.
That looks like a Cadillac.
It looks like a nice car. I'd love to have that thing. Yeah. Probably worth a pretty penny.
And you know, it says President David O. McKay. He's the president. Everybody loves him. It doesn't have the name of his wife there, but at least it says "and wife," so that you know that this chick who's sitting in the back seat with him, they're married. Okay, so nobody get excited. It's his wife, all right. But at least she's on there as his wife. This has got to be 60 years old. This picture. We are now in 2024. And now Elder David A. Bednar is the Grand Marshal, and we don't even get "and wife." There's just nothing. She's invisible on this sign.
Yeah. Susan needs to know her role and shut her mouth and just stay in the vehicle and wave. That's her only job.
Do you have that other previous slide? Because I love this hat that Elder Bednar is wearing. Isn't that a great hat?
Look how it's so clean. It's obviously the first time he's ever worn it. You know what I mean? It's a brand new hat. And I don't suspect he wears these kinds of hats too often.
No, but I understand that he's auditioning for the part in Yellowstone that Kevin Costner just vacated.
Oh, I got it. I thought it was maybe like Boss Hogg or something.
It could be that.
Hazard.
It could be that. Well, anyway, so there's the story about the Grand Marshal.
Yeah.
And this strange woman who appears to be riding next to him in the vehicle, who is otherwise unidentified to the crowd. Yeah. So just a little story there. And then the other story I wanted to pick up on was the Salt Lake Tribune, as well as Flunking Sainthood, which is Jana Reese's personal blog, also sort of a news blog as well. But she kind of gives her own sort of commentary there on various topics in Mormonism. But she did the original article 2 days earlier on July 22nd in Flunking Sainthood. And then the article was sort of picked up and reiterated a little differently in the Salt Lake Tribune on July 24th, 2024. And I put a little video together to share what that story is. So here is that, folks. Good evening. Tonight we explore a Salt Lake Tribune article by Jana Reese, noting a fascinating shift in Latter-day Saint theology. The transformation of Satan from a fearsome cosmic force to a voice of self-doubt and temptation. In earlier Mormon teaching, Satan, also known as Lucifer, was a mighty adversary. He commanded a third of the host of heaven, wielded power over the elements, and marshaled demons to carry out his will. His domain encompassed the entire planet and its seats of power. But today, Satan's role seemed diminished. He has become a voice of chronic self-doubt, urging individuals to indulge in eating a second brownie and feeling unworthy. Recent General Conference talks reveal this shift in focus. Church leaders now emphasize Satan's efforts to undermine personal spiritual growth. He seeks to erode self-esteem and distract from spiritual paths and instill feelings of inadequacy.
His attacks have become hyper-personalized, targeting individual self-improvement projects. This inward therapeutic turn marks a significant change. Historically, Satan was both an individual tempter and a cosmic force. Now his influence is primarily depicted as affecting personal spirituality, with little mention of his control over physical elements or broader societal impacts. This theological shift reminds me of some important considerations about the logical consistency of Satan's role in Mormon doctrine, some of which I covered in an episode of Mormon Discussion, number 275, Satan, the Opposition in All Things. But let's examine 3 critical points. First, premortal knowledge. In Mormon theology, Satan, or Lucifer, is a premortal spirit who, along with other spirits, knew God personally and understood his power and his plan. It's illogical to think that Satan, with firsthand knowledge of God's omnipotence and omniscience, would rebel, knowing that it was futile. Second, contradiction of goals. Satan's primary goal is to lead souls away from God and ensure their misery. However, Mormon doctrine also teaches that God's plan includes opposition in all things, and without it, there would be no growth. Thus, Satan's opposition indirectly supports God's plan, making his efforts counterproductive. And third and final, contradictory role. Satan is portrayed as the ultimate adversary, yet his existence and actions are integral to the fulfillment of God's plan of salvation, creating a contradiction where the villain's role is essential for the hero's success. Adding to this complexity, Lucifer has had the ability for thousands of years to listen in on God's prophets, to listen in on believing members of God's true church, as well as listen in to Christ himself during his mortality. And in doing so, he listened in on each of them, discussing Satan's importance and centrality to the plan of salvation. One could argue that the most effective way for Satan to thwart God's plan would be to simply step away from active engagement and retire, leaving God without an adversary, which means we actually couldn't even possibly be sure that Satan is still out there, carrying out his role, being the opposition in all things. In other words, Satan, as a necessary part of the plan, is absurd and irrational. Perhaps he had a retirement party in hell. Maybe he's sitting on a beach somewhere, enjoying a margarita, or at the very least, lounging in his study, having a strawberry daiquiri and watching porn. All right, RFM.
I'm sorry. Could you put that slide back up? I didn't quite get that address.
It's not a slide. We can watch the whole video again. But
no, just a slide with the address on it.
MormonGirls.com, but spell girls with a Z at the end.
With a Z at the end. Got it. Thank you very much.
There goes any chance you're going to create content this week. Huh? So again, if folks aren't clear on what I was trying to make the argument of, it's that the way LDS theology works, it imposes that Satan is an integral part of the plan of salvation. He is the tempter who provides opposition in all things. If Satan is half intelligent, he has been listening for so long that he realizes that he is integral to the plan, that there must be an opposition in all things. Hence, the smartest thing he could do is simply to quit the job. And if he quits the job, how would any of us know? And to go along with what Jana Reese is saying is that modern Mormonism has reduced the effect that Satan has had, almost as if he's not working as hard or he's taking some time off.
He's phoning it in.
Yeah.
That's Satan. Satan is critical to the modern Christian conception of God, not to make the plan work, but to be there as an excuse for whenever God cocks up. And by that, I mean, whenever something happens that seems to indicate strongly that God is not all powerful and or all loving, like we look around in the world and see examples of it everywhere, right? Well, we have to have somebody to blame that on. It's like the Republicans and the Democrats. Both exist primarily to be someone to be blamed by the other party when things go wrong.
Yeah.
There's got to be somebody else to point the finger at, right? And so that's what Satan is. He's the guy that God can point the finger at and say, hey, it's not my fault. It's the Satan guy.
Yeah. And if, as a believing Latter-day Saint, if you look at your theology and go, Satan has to be there. We're told he's there. He has to be there. He's the tempter. He's son of morning. He's Lucifer. He's not some other person. It's not like he can quit and Gary the second
name. He has almost as many names as God, doesn't he?
Yeah, but it's not like he can quit and Gary, the second son of the morning, takes over. We're told this is Lucifer, the eldest brother of next to Jesus Christ, who is the eldest brother, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the son of the morning. He's a particular entity who was before this world was.
Right.
And if he is smart enough to go, they keep telling me that for this plan to work, there has to be me, then the best thing he can do is simply quit. And the moment you go, if Satan's smart, he quits, that means he's quit. And hence none of us could know if he's actually still on the job or not. And the universe still works the way it does because it's all make-believe anyway.
Yeah, I think Satan retired about 80 years ago, and ever since then, Screw Tape has been running the job, assisted by Wormwood.
There you go. Are those Marvel villains?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, in the C.S. Lewis universe.
Yeah. But there must be a devil because Ghost Rider made a deal with him, right?
Right. If there were no devil, then Johnny Blaze would not be Ghost Rider.
Yeah, there you go.
Checkmate.
There you go, folks.
Checkmate.
So those are the two stories I've got. And anyway, that's the news from my end.
That was fantastic. It's just really sad to see Satan come down so far. Now he's just, about the brownies and, making people feel not so good about themselves. He used to be a contender. He used to be somebody instead of a nothing, which is what I am. Let's face it. He got a one-way ticket to Palookaville. So anyway, yes, that's our Satan today. He's got great cosmic powers, teeny weeny living space.
Yeah.
And we have at the end of the show, we have a little bit of an announcement about, it's really going to be a week from tomorrow, Tuesday, August 6th. We're going to have the live stream, right? About the city council meeting in the McKinney, Texas temple. Now, technically it's Fairview. They call it McKinney. It's a source of endless confusion, as is the church in many other areas as well. This is just one of them, but they're going to be live streaming the town council meeting where everybody's going to be showing up. They had to rent a hall in order to accommodate all the Mormons and all the people who wanted to show up for this particular thing. And they're going to have this whole thing where they're all going to be talking, and people be talking for it, people talking against it. And then at the end of it, the city council is going to vote on the issue of whether that temple is going to be permitted to be built in, technically it is in Fairview, Texas, even though it's called the McKinney, Texas temple.
They had to pay extra to rent a large enough space to allow members of the church who don't even live in the jurisdiction of this town council or city council, which is sort of absurd that the city feels obligated to even let those folks in.
Yeah, I'm sure they've wasted their money on more ridiculous things, but yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So here, Rebecca Biblioteca at Mormon-ish has been getting lots and lots of emails that are sent out by the church to their members, right? We're not going to go through this, but this is basically an email that went out to a bunch of members from an area authority, telling them all about the August 6th meeting, telling them to come there, be there, and by the way, this coming Sunday, Bill, is the first Sunday in August. You know what you should be doing as a good Mormon on that day?
Fasting.
Yeah, so you're going to be fasting for the temple.
Mm-hmm.
Fast for the temple, pray for the temple, and also give a specially good fast offering.
Oh,
it actually says
that. That's absurd, isn't it? That you're using the church is using this to collect more money.
The fundraising activity is what it is. So that's what they're saying. And it's really interesting to me because I know we do this in an age of technology and internet and sending out these emails, but honestly, we haven't progressed that much since early man because we believe that there are beings that have power over us, and to a large extent, they're invisible or perhaps represented by idols or something like that. And we have to do something in order to propitiate them, in order to get them to do what it is that we want them to do. And praying is, of course, one of those things. We can't just ask them. I can't just say, if I want you to do something for me, Bill, I can't just say, hey, could you do me a favor? And I ask you what it is. No, I got to pray, and I got to keep praying. I got to pray morning, noon, and night. And not only that, I got to fast. I got to go hungry because God likes it when people go hungry, because that shows him that they're willing to put their comfort on the table. It really does mean something to them. So all we're doing is the same old stuff that we used to be doing. We used to do it with sacrifices of animals. Now we just do other things that are more socially acceptable in order to try and persuade God to do what it is that we want him to do. I don't know if all the fasting in the world or all the prayers in the world are going to help him out at this particular city council meeting, because I think the odds are that they're not going to be voting for the temple. It's not a shoo-in like it was in Las Vegas. It appears that this city council has some backbone and isn't as willing to be bought off by the church and its lawyers. So, having said all of that, there's a second part of this slide, I think, that was sent out, this email. And they encourage them. These are invitations, right? Invitations by the area authority to the members. See, invitations in Mormonism are what we call commandments, just so you know. Invitation number 1, sign the online petition in support of the temple. And you can go and do that. I went to that page, and they got some people who did little videos, like we're doing videos, except they were much shorter, and saying, oh, just love the temple, and it means so much to me, and please, please, please let us build it because I love going to the temple. And invitation number, I thought I put it about trying to put a video of my own up there, but then I thought, nah. Invitation number 2, write an email letter today. So they've got the email address where you should send those email letters to templeinfairview@gmail.com. And invitation number 3, attend the Fairview Town Council meeting on August 6th. So they came up, the city council came up with this auditorium. I can't remember what the name of it is, but I think it seats 484 people. And they had tickets go live today, I believe it was. Was it at noon? Probably Central Time. And they had half of them were for people who were residents of Fairview, and the other half were for people who were not residents of Fairview. And it appears that when Ticketmaster opened the sales, all the Mormons just they came in there and they bought up all the tickets. So I received from Rebecca this text message she received from somebody who is there in Fairview, who lives there and who is not in support of the temple, who wrote to her and said, the LDS obviously are better at this type of organizing, and they took advantage of a system meant to help Fairview residents and neighbors who will be impacted by the temple, so they wouldn't have to wait in 100-degree weather. Welcome to Texas. I guess it's the same in Utah, right? The out-of-town tickets appeared to be gone in 30 seconds. It's sad that the residents who live here and pay taxes here are shut out of their own town meeting. Fairview tried to provide a fair system, but the LDS took advantage of it. Now, I'm not exactly sure what this means because the out-of-town tickets appeared to be gone in 30 seconds, but the complaint is about the people who lived in Fairview being shut out. So
I took it as not only do the members of the church out of town buy the out-of-town tickets immediately, but then the members of the church in Fairview bought those half of the tickets really quickly as well, leaving the Fairview members who are against this, who are not members of the church, sort of on the outside looking in.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a saying that I learned from my first mission companion in Japan. His name was Elder Kyle McKay. He's now the church historian.
There are compelling reasons to doubt that guy.
That's the guy.
Okay.
That's memorable for a different reason. But what he told me at the time was we'd sit there at the table, we'd have dinner, we'd have the prayer, right? Somebody'd say the prayer. And after the prayer was over and before we started eating, Elder McKay would always say, in this life, because you got to go quick for the food, right? Otherwise, it's gone before you can get to it, and somebody else has it. He said, in this life, there's the quick and the dead.
There you go.
And it looks like the same is true for tickets to the city council meeting in Fairview, Texas.
Shame.
So that looks like is that it? Is that everything you have?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to show is just a thumbnail of what we're going to be doing, folks. August 6th, 2024, we will bring you that town council. We will show that council live as it's happening. RFM and I will start the event an hour early and give some commentary leading up to it. There's still some discussion behind the scenes of having folks on the ground there, so we'll reach out and kind of confirm that and shore that up later. But the LDS Church versus Fairview, Texas live, August 6, 2024. The meeting starts at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. We're basing this all on Utah because that's where most of our viewers, followers, fans, listeners are. So folks, 6 p.m. Mountain Time is when the meeting starts. 5 p.m. Mountain Time is when RFM and I will start live coverage, and then we will show that meeting as it's occurring, and we will hang on after it's over to give commentary as well. So we look forward to you folks joining us for that. You can see that on the Mormonish or Mormon Discussion YouTube channels, and hopefully we'll see each of you there.
Bill, I got a question to ask you.
Yes.
I'm just hitting you with this live. It's the Mormon Newscast that we're doing on a week from tomorrow. Does that mean that we're not going to be having the regularly scheduled Mormon Newscast next Monday?
I don't know that. So I think when this show is over, we'll have to check in with Rebecca and see what the deal is. But I'm okay having it both Monday night and Tuesday. I'll leave it up to you guys.
Well, we'll see if any big news breaks between now and then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is the show for tonight. Once again, best wishes to you, Rebecca, and your family. And hope everything goes well there. Thank you, everybody, for watching the Mormon Newscast. Please hit like. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please leave a comment below. And I think that, Bill, you've done some work on the have you done some work on the donation page here?
Yeah, in fact,
that was Mormonism After Dark.
No. That was man, you have to give me 2 seconds here, but I can find it here really quick. And I will put it in the comments, and I can also put a banner up here really quick, folks. This would be how you can help us. Man, I was hoping to find it somewhere else, but let me look here. Google Docs.
Bill, so it's absolutely amazing the way he does this.
What's that? Trying to find something really quick?
All the things you do. It's amazing to me.
Gotcha. Well, let's take a look here. So what we did, we created a donor box account. I don't know that I want to emphasize this too much on the show, only because this will be Mormon Discussions version of a donor box, and Rebecca collects donations on her behalf for the Mormon Newscast as well, I believe. So there is that. But I will at least, since it's just the two of us, I guess we get to decide. So I've got it right here. Donor box, StreamYard. I'll put it up in the comments. And I'm just going to share this on our YouTube channel so it doesn't go out on Mormonish's YouTube. And I'll also, as soon as the show closes, I will put that link in the show notes. And so, folks, this is you donating to Mormon Discussion, sending money to RFM and myself in our effort to be part of the Mormon Newscast and to keep this program going. So we very much appreciate any donations that you folks can give.
And certainly, if you want to donate to Rebecca for her job that she does, and she does an incredible job here, and she's always on top of things and finding all these great stories that we cover. She finds the best stories, and she's always working. I don't know when that woman sleeps, honestly. But if you want to donate to her, go to Mormonish and make a donation there. Is that correct, Bill?
As far as I know, they have a donation. In fact, Landon is probably I know he was in the chat earlier. Okay. Landon, if you could just confirm to folks that you've got a donation platform. I think you guys are using DonorBox as well. So folks should be able to donate to Rebecca on behalf of her effort here at the Mormon Newscast as well.
Okay, then I will give the standard closing here. but with the caveat that keep an eye open on the Facebook pages and on the home pages of these to see what's going to happen, whether we are going to have the Mormon Newscast next Monday, but tentatively scheduled. We're definitely going to be here on Tuesday, August 6th, but possibly on next Monday, which would be August 5th of 2024 at 6:00 p.m. Mountain Time. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for all of your support. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Susan Bednar here. That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast. And remember to never take me too seriously.